Hello everyone, this is Darko 2012, and I'm reading an article titled "There Will Be Nowhere to Run from the New World Government." This is a London Telegraph article, actually. It was posted on Monday. It says, you can also turn down the volume if you just want to read it. There is a scope for debate, innumerable newspaper quizzes about who is the most influential public figure of the year, of which is the most significant event. But there can be a little doubt which word won the prize for the most important adjective. 2009 was the year in which global swept the rest of the political lexicon into obscurity. There were global crises and global challenges. The only possible resolution which lay in global solutions, necessitating global agreements. Gordon Brown actually suggested something called a global alliance in response to climate change. Would this be an alliance against the Axis of Extra-Terrestrials? Some of this was sheer hokum when uttered by Gordon Brown. The word global, as in global economic crisis, meant it's not my fault. To the extent that the word had intelligible meaning, it also had political ramifications that were scarcely examined by those who banded it by such ponderous self-importance. The mere utterance of it was assumed to sweep away any consideration of what was once assumed to be the most basic principle of modern democracy, that elected national governments are responsible to their own people, that the right to govern derives from the consent of the electorate. The dangerous idea that the democratic accountability of national governments should simply be dispensed with in favor of global agreements reached after close negotiations between world leaders never, so far as I can recall, entered into the arena of public discussion, except in the United States, where it has become a very contentious talking point, the U.S. still holding firmly to the 18th century idea that power should lie with the will of the people. Nor was much consideration given to the logical conclusions of all this grandia talk of global consensus as unquestionably desirable. If there was no popular choice about approving supranational, legally binding agreements, what would happen to dissenters who did not accept the premises? On climate change, for example, when there was no possibility of fleeing to another country in protest. Was this to be regarded as the emergence of world government? And would it have the powers of policing and enforcement that would supersede the authority of elected national governments? In effect, this was the infamous democratic deficit of the European Union elevated onto a planetary scale. And if the EU model is anything to go by, then the agencies of global authority will involve vast tracts of power being handed to unelected officials. Forget the relatively petty irritations of Euro bureaucracy. Welcome to the era of Earth bureaucracy, when there will be literally nowhere to run. I like how he said that, because that's exactly how I feel about all this. There's nowhere to go. But you may say, however dire the political consequences, surely there is something in this obsession with global dilemmas. Economics is now based on the world market due to globalization, and if the planet really is facing some sort of man-made climate crisis, then that too is a problem that transcends national boundaries. Surely, if our problems are universal, the solutions must be as well. Well, yes and no. Calling a problem global is meant to imply three different things. That is, the result of the actions of the people in different countries, that those actions have impacted on the lives of everyone in the world, and that the remedy must involve pretty much identical responses or correctives to those actions. Those are separate premises, any of which might be true, with the rest of them necessarily being so. The banking crisis certainly had its roots in the international nature of finance, but the way it affected countries and peoples varied considerably according to the differences in their internal arrangements. Britain suffered particularly badly because of its addiction to public and private debt, whereas Australia escaped relatively unscathed. That a problem is international in its roots does not necessarily imply that the solution must involve the hammering out of a uniform global prescription. In fact, given the differences in effects and consequences for individual countries, the attempt to do such hammering might be a huge waste of time and resources that could be put to better use devising national remedies. France and Germany seem to have pulled themselves out of recession over the past year, and the U.S. may be about to do so, while Britain has not. These variations owe almost nothing to the pompous, overblown attempts to find global solutions. They are largely to do with that individual countries, under the pressure of democratic accountability, doing what they decide is best for their own people. This is not what Mr. Brown calls narrow self-interest or beggar my neighbor ruthlessness. It is the proper business of elected national leaders to make judgments that are appropriate for the conditions of their own populations. It is also the right that heads of nations refuse to sign up to legally binding global agreements which would disadvantage their own people. The resistance of developing nations to a climate change pact that would deny them the kind of economic growth and mass prosperity to which advanced countries have become accustomed to is not mindless selfishness. It's a proper regard to the welfare of their own citizens. The word global has taken on sacred connotations. Any actions taken in its name must be inherently virtuous, whereas the decisions of individual countries are necessarily narrow and self-serving. Never mind that a global agreement will also almost certainly be disproportionately influenced by the most powerful nations. Nor is our era so utterly unlike previous ones for all its technological sophistication. We have always needed multilateral agreements, whether about trade, organized crime, border controls, or mutual defense. If the impact of our behavior on humanity at large is much greater or more rapid than ever before, then we shall have to find ways of dealing with that which do not involve sacrificing the most enlightened form of government ever devised. There is a whiff of totalitarianism about this new theology, in which the risks are described in such cosmic terms that everything else must give way. Globalism is another form of internationalism that has been a core belief of the left. A commitment to class rather than country seemed an admirable antidote to the blood and soil nationalism that has gave rise to fascism. The nation-state has never quite recovered from the bad name it required in the last century as a progenitor of world war, but if it is to be relegated to the dustbin of history, then we had better come up with the new mechanisms for allowing people to have a say in how they are governed. Maybe that could be the next year's global challenge, which it actually will be, because in their own documents, UN documents, and that in Club of Rome and Council on Foreign Relations, the elites that are pushing for global governance or global government, they call it global governance because they don't want to call it global government because that's what we call it. But they know that is the biggest obstacle in building a kind of a world government type structure, is that they know that each nation, especially the United States, they feel like that they're so far away, from their own land, from their own country, that 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 their needs are not going to really be met. Their voices can't be heard from from that far away. They don't think it's possible. They also feel that they're that the citizens, especially in the United States again, don't like the idea of global governance, the United Nations, and everything that they're doing as far as having global solutions to fix these problems. Because they feel like these people are not really elected. They're just kind of like a unelected bureaucracy of aristocrats, kind of making the decisions for the lower class, thinking for us. And I think that's why most of the people, or at least half of the country in the United States, is against this global government, because we don't have a history of being slaves. We have a history of being free people, free human beings who can determine our own fate and our own futures. So I don't think that's going to change. So this is a very good article. I like how it was written, especially for a British guy, a British person. So yeah, a woman, Janet. So thanks for listening and checking it out. It's kind of long, but anyways, leave your comments. Let me know what you think. All right.